And Gary's going to teach this morning.
I didn't know that.
You couldn't you, Gary?
Yep, he probably could. He probably just read the scripture and go right at it. Our scripture this morning, I told Aaron's at home, and so I told him, I told him, said, you come to Sunday school? And he said, well, probably not. He hadn't been, he'll be at church. But I said, well, I'm preaching on the second half of John 1.
Preaching or teaching?
Teaching. Teaching on the second half of John 1. He said, what? I said, it's about the light that's coming into the world, and it's a very familiar scripture, and you can see how it's notated in the in our reading here, sort of like it's in song fashion. So let me read it to you, and then we'll get into the lesson. The light was in the world, and the world came into being through the light, but the world didn't recognize the light. That light came to his own people, and his own people didn't welcome him. But those who did welcome him, those who believed in his name, he authorized to become God's children, born from blood, nor from human desire born not from blood, nor from human desire or passion, but born from God. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory like that of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified about him, crying out, this is the one of whom I said, he who comes after me is greater than me, because he existed before me. From his fullness we have received all grace upon grace. As the law was given through Moses, so grace and truth came into being through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side, has made God known. And our purpose this morning is to affirm that when we welcome Christ, he enables us to become God's children. Okay, so for the last 4 weeks, we have been discussing and realizing and affirming that we are made in God's image. And now we're going to be enabled to be children of God through Jesus Christ. So why, if I am already the spitting image of God, do I need to become his child? Why am I not already his child? Am I not already the child of God? I mean, if you were made in his image, why do I have to affirm myself to be a member of the family? Set aside for just a moment the question of salvation and ask yourself, do I want to be a child of God? There have been a lot of bad things done by people claiming to be a child of God. If you go down through history, you can read about them and everything from sexual abuse to racial and sexual discrimination, groups that took their membership, what they thought was their membership into God's family as a license to hate other people. And let me testify that if you can see that, then you probably become a child of God, because the light has shined upon you. If you can see the problems within the church and the problems within the history of the church, you know, it's evidence that the light of Christ shines upon you. Accepting Christ, you know, this is where they say the preacher quits preaching and goes to meddling. The light of Christ shines into your own life, though. And that's where it's hard. It's easy for me sometimes to take that 9,000 watt light bulb and shine it on you. But I want to take this little old pocket, flashlight and shine it on me, on my problems, on what I've done and everything. And the light of Christ don't work like that. When it shines around the world. It shines into our own lives. It uncovers.
It's getting comfortable.
I have enough room.
She wanted to get away from you.
Apparently.
That's right. That's when you start smelling.
Yeah, I was getting away from her light.
The light of Christ, it uncovers the ideas that comes with darkness, that cause darkness in our lives and also in our world. Now, author, he starts the lesson talking about wishing people a Merry Christmas. And he says, it's not out of some attempt to be against anti-religious bias. He said, he's in the store and he said, Merry Christmas to the person working there, and the person gave him an odd look. Well, the reason he gave him an odd look, because it was after Christmas. He said, I keep saying it, Merry Christmas, until January the 6th. Christmas is a 12-day celebration that only starts on Christmas Day, technically after sundown on Christmas Eve, and it ends on January the 6th with the start of the Epiphany. We are not in the Christmas season yet. We won't be in the Christmas season until Thursday. But we know how odd that seems to us. When I was working in New York, I had this lady at work with me, and she all of a sudden she's taking January the 6th off, and then her and several others, and I'm like, why are y'all taking that day off? Well, I won't say it's in the Hispanic, but it's probably in the Mexican tradition. They have this thing called Three Kings Day, and she said that's when I give my children their gifts. I said, so they didn't get gifts on Christmas? She said, well, I gave them one. She said, but we make them wait. The wise men came. We celebrate the wise men coming on January the 6th, and that's their tradition to give the gifts on that day. The author goes back and says, but after spending time with John's prologue in John 1 through 18, I'm convinced that it is always a good time to say Merry Christmas, even in the summer. You think you're going to get odd looks if you say Merry Christmas on December the 30th. Say it on July the 30th, and they might be calling, we got one down here, we might want to send the paddy wagon down here for them. John proclaims that a new age has dawned with the birth of Jesus Christ, and in Jesus the Word became flesh and made his home among us. The Word has always existed and always held the cosmos together, but now the Word, as we've been talking about last week for sure, has come amongst us. Our God is not far off and detached. Our God has made his home with us, tented among us, is what our author says here. And then he quotes Charles Wesley's song, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, Word of the Father now in flesh appeared. And then he quotes another song, He came down to earth from heaven, who is God and Lord of all. And this is the great news of Christmas. Then, there's always the issue. The world did not receive him. Jesus was and still is met with indifference and hostility. Even his own people didn't welcome him. And our author says this is the world's great folly. And for this, John says the world is under judgment. The light came in the world, and people loved darkness more than light, for their actions are evil. And we know that to be true. In October, if y'all remember, Laurie had the laity program, and we sang 2 Christmas carols in October. And it was a little odd. I remember saying it seemed a little odd. Then on November the 1st, if you remember, there was a radio station, and it does it every year, that begins 24 hours a day of Christmas music on November the 1st. And we all sort of poke fun at it, laugh about it, who's listening, and then we get in our cars and we make sure we got one of our settings on that station, because every once in a while you might want to flip over there and listen to it. While we joke around with the people we work with, oh, you ain't listening to that. Well, okay, I might listen to it out on the way home. Or if you're like me, you listen on YouTube, and of course, now I got a reason. I listen on YouTube because I got to prepare myself to play these songs come Christmas. I got to listen. I mean, it's like a job. We can all find reasons to listen before the 25th, but by the 26th, well, are we done? Are you done? And we'd surely think a Christmas carol is out of place, except for maybe in church. I can remember. As a kid growing up, I forgot who the pastor was, but we had a pastor. He wouldn't sing Christmas carols till after the 25th. And so sometimes we'd sing carols for 3 weeks after, according to where Christmas fell. We could sing after Christmas. We could have Christmas carols in the service for 3 weeks, and it was just like, okay, you're killing me, I'm an 8-year-old kid. You're killing me here. We won't sing them in December when the whole world is singing them, but now we're going to sing them in Christmas is 300 and something days away. I don't want to think about Christmas. I just got through with Christmas. I got my gifts, and you got me thinking about more gifts. And our author tells us the joy of Christmas is a joy that lasts all year long. The light has come. The light is coming to the world now. And our author, he gets into the scripture, and he said, have you ever heard someone talk about how they found Jesus? And they used to say it, and he got it in quotation, so-and-so found Jesus last night. And when I heard that, I thought about one time I was working at Food Line, and you know how you are in the grocery store. If you've worked in the grocery store, when you take break time, this is why you can't find anybody in grocery stores when you need them. When it's break time, we all broke together. I mean, there'd be 8 of us back in and there might only be 3 people out on the floor, and the 8 of us be back in the break room. And there was a lady that I worked with, a young lady, I should say a girl, who was married, and she her husband was, what they say probably wasn't worth the bullet it would take to shoot him. He was just, he was a philanderer and he did all kind of things. And she come to work one day and she said, called her husband's name, said he found Jesus last night. One of the guys who had this cynical, dry humor said, well, I didn't know he was lost. Where did he find him at? And our author, he sort of pokes fun at it too. He says, consider that the Gospels appear to be more of a story about Jesus finding us, less than the other way around. Paul uses the term adopted by God. And if you read Paul he says adopted a lot of times in Romans and Galatians, and John uses the term authorized. When I hear authorized, all of a sudden bona fide goes through my mind. And remember oh brother, we're out there. He's bona fide. He's bona fide. Well, he's authorized here. If you become a child of God, you've been authorized. John says he authorized them to become God's children. And this term helps us grasp at the mystery. Don't totally uncover the mystery. Just how exactly have we been received by God? John said that those who are authorized to become children of God did not receive their position as God's children by the nobility of their birth. There are no blue bloods when it comes to spiritual birth. Now, I know that probably most of us in here are in church this morning because our parents, probably mother and father in a lot of cases, brought us to church as children. But that does not make you a Christian. You have to accept Christ for yourself. Glory be, we've been indoctrinated, you might say, and that's what the skeptics would say. Well, they've been indoctrinated, but still it comes down to, to become a child of God, to become a Christian, we have to make that acceptance. As Jesus told Nicodemus, whatever is born of the flesh is flesh, and whatever is born of the Spirit is spirit. The children of God did not gain that status through human desire. It's through God. No other human being can make us God's children, not the church, not the pastor, no one. Neither can we will our way into being God's son or daughter. I go to such and such a church because I go there. Well, that's not how it works. We all have to make that decision. Our status of children, as children of God, is given to us by God alone through the Spirit. Only God can receive the glory for this. And then John, he brings the truth out. He said John uses it here to say that there are those who receive Jesus and those who didn't. There are those who get it and those who don't. And some of those, that happens too on a daily basis. One day they get it and one day they don't. One day they get it, one day they don't. It's a fluid thing, you might say. My daughter and my son-in-law have decided to be up front with their adopted children about being adopted. And I'm on board with this. I'm sure there are those out there that don't like that type of honesty, but I'm on board with this honesty. We all know the struggles of our teenage years and figuring out who we are and who we are in this world, and there's not going to be any hidden secrets. And I like that idea that there's nothing that's going to be hidden from anybody. I love all three of my grandchildren, though biologically, and if you may know, biologically, they're not my descendant biologically, but I hope that they will, never reject the love that I have for them and accept this love and accept me as their papa. But if they do, if they don't, it will not stop me from loving them. I'm sure there's going to be times of rebellion. It's coming. Grandpa's an old stupid so-and-so. I might have said that about my grandfather once or twice. Or my grandma, she'd tell me, and we'd have all us gathered around the table down on First Street, and she'd tell us something, and we'd just sort of look at each other and grin. And now, the things she was telling us seemed pretty darn smart. I'm going to love my grandchildren no matter what. And I see God's love for me the same way. He loves me even when I do not choose to receive this love. Christ comes to bring us all into the family, and we only have to choose to belong or not. And like I say, that can change on a daily basis, I'm sure, and on an hourly basis, probably in some cases. After it goes on, he sort of reemphasizes the point about some people didn't welcome Christ. This will put Jesus in a long distinguished line of prophets who brought God's message only to be rebuffed by the recipients. And before you give them a hard time, think about the times in your life when you looked around and said, I hope Jesus ain't watching this. and you know, I tease Laurie sometimes. She'll say something and I'll say, well, would Jesus really say that? And then don't get, but I'm telling you, in all honesty, she did the same thing to me. I'll say something. She said, I don't think Jesus would have said that. Well, you know, perhaps not. The word came to the people who ought to have known him. The word who made the world was rejected by much of the very world he made. So to those who receive him, he authorized them to become God's children. Then our author talks about DNA. With DNA testing available by mail order, there has been a renewed interest in learning about one's genetic material. I don't know if you've had yours tested or not, but perhaps so. And it's created this great interest in genealogy. I haven't seen a lot of them lately, but there'll be this time when Ancestry.com is going to make about 8 million commercials. I don't think it's during the Christmas season. I might have seen one or two, but there's this time period out there when I reckon people are thinking about their history, and they just, you go on, you give them money, and they'll tell you, they can take you pretty far back. I understand. I've never done it. Our author says it's not hard to see the appeal of taking a DNA test. The companies that make them available know that we want more knowledge about ourselves. We want a story, and we want to belong. Where do we belong, and what's our story? Put my finger there. I put my finger there when I go off track. So I'm sitting at in a restaurant outside, well, not a restaurant, a little food court thing at the McCormick. Is that in Chicago? Is McCormick in Chicago? I think it is, at the McCormick Center. And I'm having lunch. It's at a trade show, and the guy sitting there with me, he was from Switzerland. And we're talking and everything. And he said, one thing you Americans don't have that we have is you don't have 800 years of history. He said, I know who my ancestors were 800 years ago, and their gripes and their beefs still haunt us today. He said that you get people together, and they'll start talking about what your family did to my family 800 years ago, or what your family, what that village did to our village 1,000 years ago. And we want these stories sometimes, and these stories can be devastating. But we want to belong. And John is telling us that God authorizes us to become a part of God's family, to become children of God. So what exactly does it mean to be the children of God? And how many of you, I don't know how many music fans you got here, but how many of you have already said in your brain, I came upon the child of God. He was walking along the road. Y'all know that song? Nobody knows it? Kane knows it. Nobody else knows it. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young? Woodstock? I mean, come on, Kane. That's where they were going. He's going to Woodstock, going down to so-and-so's farm and playing a rock and roll band. That's what, and every time I saw that child of God, that's what that song went through my head. And the author says, let's start by examining how John probably understood the phrase in his time. How did he understand it? Well, the Greeks and Romans, they had no problem with children being directly linked to God. Now, that didn't mean the children were divine. It's just that they were, they were offspring of gods. Didn't make them divine because, they thought, at the time, they thought Caesar was God. They thought Caesar was divine. So now let's roll around. The Jewish people, they claimed their ancestry as being God's children. And there was a rich appreciation of God's fatherhood to Israel. And we all want to belong to God, to be God's children. Have you ever been in a stressful situation or a tough situation or a dire situation or whatever it is, it's just things are not good, and someone come alongside you and helps you out? And did you think that person was heaven sent? How many times in your life can you, I don't want to sit here and get you going down memory lane, but I'm sure that all of us probably have 5, 10, 15, 20 times in our lives when we were in a tough spot or we were struggling and somebody came along and we thought to ourselves, maybe not at that moment, but for sure afterwards, that person was heaven sent. Not divine, but surely acting in a divine way. Since we are made in the image of the divine, we have within us the capacity to act in a divine manner. It is in our DNA, you might say, that we can act, and we don't always do it. There's times when I went by somebody who was hurting and just kept right on going. rode by Tamara Mama one time. I'm coming down the road, it's like 12 degrees, and they had a flat tire, and it pulled off the road. And I couldn't see them on the road. I couldn't see them, so I'm paying attention where I'm going. It's like, I think it might have been some snow and ice on the road. Yeah, it was cold, and I'm trying to keep my car in the lane, and I rode right by. Right by. You didn't get any divine that day, did you?
Not from you.
You know, it's just, sometimes we just miss it. But it is in our DNA to allow the divine to come out. We had Aaron's DNA tested, and the results were interesting. It was interesting in the fact, especially for me and for Laurie too, it could point to certain areas of the United States where we had pockets of people who were kin to us. I mean, they started talking about Shelby. You know, I knew that's my grandmother's family. And then they started talking about North Carolina, up in Lexington, Winston-Salem. That's where my father's family's from. That I have relatives. And then they started talking about going back to Northern Europe. And then it takes. Has anybody had this done besides me? Oh wow. It's interesting to come back and says that Laurie and I both descended from a group of people who migrated out of Africa into Northern Europe 50,000 years ago. I thought that was interesting. I said, well, we're married, we're kin to each other, we're married, you know, it's South, we can do that. I mean, you know,
it's far enough back.
We went to Laurie's cousin's 50th anniversary last night. Went to a little gathering, and there was somebody at the table talking. They was talking about two people who were dating each other, might have even gotten married, that were like third cousins. I said, "What did you say?" I mean, third cousin.
Family reunion to meet you.
Plus it's union. Of course, I hope nobody in union gonna see this and give me a hard time. But preacher, I know you did your best when you was down there, but
this preacher's related to Abraham Lincoln.
he is. Wow. A house divided will not stand. Oh, I could talk about Lincoln. I've read several biographies on Lincoln, but I need to stay focused. Okay, so DNA. Let me go back to DNA. Christian fundamentalists will point to the mitochondrial Eve. Do y'all know what that is? The mitochondrial Eve? Yeah.
The mother gene.
The mother, yeah, the mother gene. I thought you said Jesus first, but you meant gene. Yeah, the mother gene. I mean, it goes back, and they'll point and say, okay, there's a single place where all of us came from. And they'll point to that and say, well, that's evidence of Eve. But they're going to reject the same evidence that says that Eve lived 200,000 years ago. You know, it don't matter what you do, you're going to accept one part and somebody's going to accept another part. And they're going to, there is this evidence that we are all connected. We are all children of God. The question is, are we going to accept it? Some accept that we are made in the image of God, but they reject the need to be a child of God, and then some act as often as possible in a divine manner by loving our neighbor, by loving your neighbor. Jesus told us there was two great commandments: love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor. Which is a perfect segue into the last part of this lesson. Author identifies Bruce Stanley. He said he's the president and CEO of Methodist Home for Children, a foster care and adoption ministry in North Carolina. And then he tells this story. A policeman's out in the town. And he comes across this man who's clearly struggling and confused in his public park. And he's trying to help this man out. You know what's going on. The man clearly had issues going on. And he asked the man where he lived. And the man gave the address for this adoption, for this foster home. So the policeman put him in the car and took him to the Methodist home. And when Bruce arrived, Bruce Stanley, the president here, when he arrived and heard this, he said to the young man, "You are always welcome here." And he told the officer, "I'll take it from here." He chose to get involved. He chose, yes, this person had a connection to this foster home, but he clearly had, our author said, identified as a schizophrenic, and he clearly had problems going on, but the man said, "I'll take it from here," which meant however this case is going to be handled, it's going to be handled with love and care. which is the important part here. Give God thanks for coming into the world in the person of Jesus Christ to help do these things, to help guide people in this way, to set everything right. And that includes making us children of God. How many times in my own life have I messed up or got off track or took the wrong road or got lost and confused or just basically messed up? Then to have a child of God come along to point me back to the cross, to point me back to the manger in this season, to the altar, point me back toward the straight and narrow, you might say, back to getting my life together. I can name names. I can point to places in this room where they said, and some probably still said. I can see the places in the Mill Village where they lived. And not just in the Mill Village, I can see places throughout the town. I can take you to places where they met me in my life to help guide me back to the Lord. Maybe not schizophrenic, but definitely alone and struggling and confused. And they helped me open my eyes to the Lord and my ears to the Lord to hear God say, I'll take it from here. Because if you put your life, if you're a child of God and you get out there and someone points you back to the right way, that's the words you want to hear God say. And I am confident He will say this, I'll take it from here. I am thankful for those children of God, and I hope and pray that I can be a child of God to anyone that He points me to. Our purpose statement this morning was to affirm that when we welcome Christ, He enables us to become God's children. And our teacher's book author, he tells the story of an 11-year-old Elijah Cummings. Y'all know who Elijah Cummings is. He was a representative from Maryland, from Baltimore. Was his? I think he died here a couple of years ago. But he points to this story about 11-year-old Elijah Cummings to remind us that not everyone defines being a child of God the same way. On a hot day in 1962, Elijah Cummings and his friends went to a public pool and was met with anger by white adults who hurled insults, bottles, and rocks at these black kids. Were they all not God's children? I remember in the mid-'60s, Uncle Jim loading up the bus. I've told you before, when you come at the end of 3rd Street and you start toward the ballpark and you see that bus sitting there and you knew you was going swimming or you knew he was going on some kind of adventure, and the excitement. I mean, I can remember being so excited walking down the road, almost getting into a little bit of a trot, going over because we're going swimming today. And he'd take us all swimming, and we'd go down to Ennery or over to Lyman to swim. And I never thought once that there might be a problem with all of us, black and white, because we had black and white kids on the bus swimming together. This is 1965. So this is the South, so we're only 3 years later than Cummings here. I never even thought twice. It was much later, it was years later when I found out that there had once been plans to build a pool right there. A public swimming pool right here beside part of the plans. I mean, I think I've actually seen the plans for it. In my mind's eye, I can see that. But the community, there was a pressure in the community, and it caused it. I don't know if it caused it to be built in Ennery or just got the Ennery was already there and it got it where it wasn't built here. It was stressful times. The 60s were stressful times, and people had a lot of opinions. You okay, Buck? Buck, you all right?
Yeah, I'm
Okay. You leaned over like that, you scared me. Okay. All right. Back to Representative Cummings. Years later, he had a man, he was obviously he'd been a representative for a while, came up to him and apologized to him for being one of those that threw rocks at him. And the man was very apologetic, and this is an apology that Cummings accepted. Yes, we are created in God's image. And yes, He invites us into His family. And yes, we are all children of God. And can we say yes to being His child? Well, first we have to accept. Then comes the challenge of living up to the image. Or living into the image in which we are created. I take that creation part. I like to put that in there. We are created beings. And we are created in the image of God, and when we become children of God, it helps us and points us in the right direction that we can live into that image in which we've been created. All right, we have a few moments this morning. Questions, comments, thoughts? All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll dismiss. Father, again, we thank you for this lesson. We thank you for the season, Lord. We thank you for that we are preparing our hearts and our minds and our souls to celebrate you coming into this world, and help us to recognize what that means. That we all can be children. Yes, we're all made in your image. We can all be your children. And Lord, help us as we go in this week. We know that there are those out there this week that need to see the image of God in some form or fashion. And Lord, pray that as you point these out to us, that we can live into that image and share your love with all those around us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, thanks everybody.
Good.
Thank you, Jim. You want to turn on the camera? You want to turn the camera on?